Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to continue with the management of medically compromised child. As there is a saying that ancient societies always saw disease as something wrong, but modern societies are treating the diseases as normal. These are the contents for today: HIV and the gastrointestinal disorders. As in the last seminar, we have discussed about what is HIV, the transmission, clinical and the oral manifestations. And today I would like to continue with uh, the dental management of the child with HIV. So, are we really ready to treat a child with HIV? This study by Dhyana RS et al. Concluded that the staff fears and increased personal risk are found to be the most frequently reported concerns in treating the HIV patients among the dentists in Kerala. And senior dentists showed more reluctance to treat the HIV positive individuals. Therefore, there is a feeling of fear among the dentists while treating the patients with HIV. And now dealing with the pandemic these days, that is COVID, we are obviously going to take more care for the infection control and sterilization, and therefore treating diseases like HIV would be easier. Starting with infection control, the prevention of the passages of the infectious disease from the patient to the healthcare providers and the other patients who may be treated in the same area should be taken care of, and the prevention of the transmission of any additional infection to the already compromised patient should be taken into consideration. Now coming to the personal protective equipment, the CDC outlines the specific personal protective equipments and in the order in which the healthcare providers should put it on, that is the gown, surgical mask and the respirator or the mask, the protective eyewear and the face shields, and then the gloves again. Now this is the sequence in which the PPE kit should be put on, which we have already discussed during the COVID-19 seminar, but I am today again going to revise that. First, we should put on the gown, which should cover the whole body from the neck to the knees, the arms to the end of the wrist, and wrap around the back. Then the mask or the respirator, it should have secure ties or the elastic bands in the middle of the head and the neck, and it should be flexible to the nose bridge, and it should have a snug fit and to the face and also below the chin. The goggles or the face shield also should be put on, and then two pairs of gloves should be put on. Now removing or the doffing of the PPE kit, it could be done that first the gloves are removed and then the face shield or the goggles are removed, and then the gown is removed and disposed, then the mask or the respirator, and washing of the hands in between all these procedures, and the end of the procedure should be done. There is another method of removing the PPE kit, which could be removing the gown and the gloves together, then the face shield, then the mask or the respirator, and washing the hands in between and after the procedure. The hand hygiene, according to CDC, hand hygiene guidelines are given. The dentist should perform hand hygiene before and after all the patient contact with the potentially infectious material, and before putting on and after removing the PPE kits, which also includes the gloves. It should be performed by using an alcohol-based hand rub with 60 to 95% alcohol, or washing the hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. This is the method of washing of hands, which we already know that we should wash the hands for 20 seconds and rub the disinfectant or the soap in between the fingers and the palms, and even the thumbs should be clean. Now coming to cleaning of the instruments, the removal of the gross organic soil, that is the presence of the saliva or the contaminated blood on the instrument, should be clean. They can be kept in the ultrasonic cleaners. A pre-soak solution prevents the bioburden from drying on the instruments and therefore allows the cleaning process to remove it easily. Therefore, after the use of the instruments, they should be kept in the pre-soak solutions. The liquid could be water, enzyme solution, or any disinfectant. Sterilization, it refers to the complete destruction of all the microbial life, and disinfection, it refers to the destruction of the most vegetative bacteria but not all the spores. Thus, the current standards put forth by the AD and the CDC states that clearly that any instrument or the articles used in the mouth of one patient must be heat sterilized before being used in the mouth of the other patient. The heat sterilization could be done by three methods: steam autoclave, which can be used for the instruments wrapped in the cloth or in the multiple wraps, and chemiclave, which is good for when the instruments are wrapped in the single or double layer wraps, and the dry heat. It is the least acceptable method because of the extended time. For the sharp instruments and the needles, they must be handled very carefully. The syringes and the needles Scalpel blades and other sharp instruments must be placed in the puncture-resistant containers for the later disposal, so that the healthcare workers are not exposed to them, and the needles should not be bent or broken prior to the disposal of the needles. The risk factors for the dental caries in the children with HIV could be high lactobacilli and the MS burdens, the increased plaque indices, high carbohydrate dietary supplements, the frequent intake of the juices, milk, and the other sweetened beverages to prevent the dehydration, the cariogenic effects of the oral medications, and the decreased salivary flow associated with the medications. These all we have discussed in the last seminar. So today I'm going to continue with the management part. The objectives of the management should be decrease the morbidity and mortality due to the infection and hemorrhage, facilitate the patient's nutritional status, because if the patient is having proper occlusion, they may be able to chew properly, and therefore it may help in improving the nutritional status, improve the patient's comfort, and it also promotes the self-esteem and socialization because of the aesthetic smiles, and increase in the education of the patient, family, and the physician relative to the importance of maintaining the oral health and the methods to achieve it. And it also helps in monitoring the HIV disease progression through the identification of the various orofacial lesions, which we have discussed last time. Now, guiding the families to the disclosure process, because there are chances that HIV is the oral manifestations are precedes the other clinical manifestations, and therefore we might be the first person to disclose this to the family. Therefore, since it is highly emotional, we should carefully listen to the patient and inform the child about the diagnosis if they are older enough to understand about it. The parents should provide an explanation that is appropriate to the child's cognitive, emotional, and developmental stage. The pre-adolescent and adolescent child may have many sophisticated questions, and therefore the dentist as well as the parents should be prepared to answer all of them. Offer the child to the opportunity to talk or meet the other children with the same illness, so that they don't feel that they are the only ones suffering from it. Encourage the parents to maintain or reestablish the routines at home, so that the child doesn't feel left out. The circumstances when the routine dental care may need to be modified, as given by Sherlock PJ et al. When the CD4 lymphocyte levels are low, predisposing to the oral lesions, require specific treatments. The reduced platelet levels below 60,000 cells per millimeter cube affects the clotting time. The reduced neutrophil levels below 500 cells per mm cube may require the antibiotic prophylaxis, and patients with the later stage may require a rolling treatment plan with the regular reviews of the ability to attend and withstand the treatment. The blood analysis can assist in the planning of the treatment, and therefore the blood analysis should be done in all the patients who have confirmed HIV infection. The treatment can be prioritized according to it should relieve the pain and treat the infection, restore the function, prevent the further disease, and also consider the aesthetic of the patient. The modifications could anticipate the complications, the medical conditions that may interfere with the procedure, and the prognosis of the disease. For the treatment planning, the patient's medical condition, that is the ability to endure the dental visit, should be taken into consideration. We should restore the masticatory function so that the patient is able to have the food properly. The prognosis for the survival of the patient should be taken into consideration, and the financial resources, as the patient is already spending a lot on the medical disease. Therefore, the financial resources should also be considered. Starting with the antibiotic prophylaxis, the higher propensity for developing the allergic reactions to the antibiotics is seen in the patients with HIV. According to AHA, the patients who are at high risk for developing subacute bacterial endocarditis need antibiotic prophylaxis prior to the dental therapy, regardless of the HIV status. The patients with the severe neutropenia below 50 cells per millimeter cube are highly susceptible to the bacterial infections. The neutropenia frequently complicates the HIV infection and has been reported to occur in 35 to 75 patients in the 35 to 75% patients with HIV, as stated by Dovecchio in 1993. Neutropenia is a significant risk factor for the bacterial infections, and therefore antibiotic prophylaxis should be given in the patients with HIV. However, the administration of the heart, it significantly increases the circulating hemopoietic lineages, that is the WBC count, and endogenous cytokines that have been found to regulate the neutrophil count and the functions, which was studied by Kurtkis in 2000. Then the type of antibiotics must be chosen carefully. The bactericidals like penicillin, amoxicillin, and cephalosporins should be given, whereas the bacteriostatic like erythromycin, clindamycin, or tetracycline may increase the bacterial load after the withdrawal of the antibiotics. Thus, these medications should be avoided. For the elective dental procedures, if they ANC, that is absolute neutrophil count, is more than 1000 per millimeter cube, the prophylactic antibiotics are not necessary. If ANC is between 500 to 1000, the antibiotic prophylactic can be given. If ANC is less than 500, or the WBC count is less than 2000 per millimeter cube, the elective procedure should be deferred. And if the CD4 count is less than 200, then prophylactic antibiotics must be considered. For emergency dental procedures, any procedure which needs to be performed in order to remove the emittent source of infection, the consultation with the physician, appropriate antibiotics or replacement therapy for the platelets should be considered. Now the antibiotic dosage as given by AAPD in 2019, children who are not allergic to penicillin should be given amoxicillin 50 milligrams per kg orally 1 hour prior to the dental procedure. The children who are allergic to penicillin but unable to take the oral medication should be given ampicillin 50 milligrams per kg, maximum to 2 grams IV or IM 30 minutes before the dental procedure. The children who are allergic to penicillin should be given clindamycin 20 milligrams per kg, orally 1 hour before the dental procedure, and the children who are allergic to penicillin and unable to take the oral medication should be given clindamycin 20 milligrams per kg IV or IM. Now the modifications of the dental therapy, which includes the modifications in local anesthetics, preventive care, periodontal therapy, restorative and prosthetic procedures, endodontic therapy, and the oral surgical procedures. I will be discussing all of these one by one. Starting with local anesthetics, it is similar to the other patients. There is no need to change in the local anesthetic drug or the procedure, whereas the deep block injections could be avoided in the patients with the recent history of hemostasis, and therefore the intraligamentary injections can be used. For the preventive care, follow-up, as in normal patients it is considered for 6 months. In the patients with HIV, it should be considered every 3 months. They should be prescribed daily antibacterial mouth rinses and the fluoride supplements in the form of topically applied gels, fluoride mouth rinses, and the high fluoride concentrated toothpaste. For the periodontal therapy, it should not be instituted that can exacerbate the other pathological conditions in the patient. The periodontal surgery can be safely performed in the patients with the low CD4 plus cell counts also. If the neutrophil count is below 500, then preoperative and postoperative antibiotics should be given, and a typical inflammatory response may not be seen in these patients because of the patient's immune status. For the restorative and prosthetic procedures, the choice of the treatment is determined by the patient's ability to withstand the length of the dental appointments. If the patient is not able to take very long appointments, then the choice of the material should be accordingly. To return to the continuous therapy, so if the patient is not able to return to many visits, then the treatment should be concise to 1 appointment or less number of appointments. The urgency to restore the masticatory functions and the financial resources. The endodontic therapy, meticulous instrumentation and avoid passing the instruments through the apex, which may further induce the incidence of post-operative flare-ups. For the other invasive procedures, the patient with CD4 plus cell counts below 100 cells per mm cube require evaluation of their neutrophil counts. If it is below 500, then the preoperative and postoperative antibiotics should be administered. For aggressive use of preventive and minimally invasive restorative strategies should be done. That is preventive restoration and the Pitt-Fisher sealants should be done. For pulpal therapy, guidelines should be adhered, like aggressive treatment of the non-vital primary teeth and restrictive criteria for assessing the pulpal vitality. Where the restoration should be well contoured and appropriate use of the prophylactic antibiotics should be done. The oral surgical procedures minimize the risk of excessive bleeding and invasion of the pathogens from the oral cavity to the deeper facial planes and spaces. For prevention of the hemorrhage, if the patient is having less than 50,000 platelet count, then no special precautions are if more than 50,000 platelet count, then no precautions are necessary. But if it is less than 50,000, then platelet replacement should be considered. If the patient is undergoing orthodontic treatment, fluorexidine mouth rinses should be prescribed. Fluoride supplementation and maintenance of the oral hygiene should be done. Meticulous care of the retainers and the appliances should be done so that the other infections are not generated in the oral cavity. Coming to the miscellaneous dental consideration, that is the nitrous oxide, evaluate the pulmonary function and the ability to breathe through the nose, and it could be done. For conscious sedation, evaluate the size of the tonsils and the pulmonary function and the potential for the drug interaction with the HIV medications. For general anesthesia, consult the pediatrician and the anesthesiologist to consider these patients for general anesthesia treatment. Now the oral hygiene considerations. Daily toothbrushing, deplugging of the tongue and flossing when the ANC is more than 50,000 and the platelet count is more than 20,000. And the dental hygiene efforts with the moist gauze can be suggested to the patient in which the ANC count is less than 50,000 or more, the platelet count is less than 20,000. The chlorhexidine mouth rinses should be given as a potential adjunct for the management of the conventional gingivitis, and it could also be adjunct for necrotizing periodontal diseases, which are as these patients have increased risk for gingival diseases, and it may also be beneficial for decreasing the halitosis in these patients. Since the life expectancies of the children with HIV are rising these days, and the children with HIV are at greater risk for oral and dental diseases, the consultation with the medical community is required in order to assess the risk and benefits associated with the treatment, and aggressive dental management is indicated in effort to prevent or manage the oral and dental diseases. Now, starting with the gastrointestinal diseases, it includes the gastroesophageal reflux disease and the inflammatory bowel disease. Starting with gastroesophageal reflux disease, it is involuntary passage of the gastric content into the esophagus without vomiting or the regurgitation. The content could be in the form of food, gastric secretion, saliva, biliary, or the pancreatic secretions. It is a common disorder seen in the children, and mostly it is physiological when it is termed as gastroesophageal reflux. But in some cases, it may turn pathological when it is termed as GERD. The gastroesophageal reflux is an age-related problem in the children, with most of them have the reflux till about 3 months of the age. By 6 months, it may decline in almost 20% of them, and in the others, it may disappear by the age of 1. As the age advances, if it is not disappeared, the clinical picture of the GERD changes from regurgitation to the pain that can be manifested as heartburn or the epigastric pain in the adults. The manifested children are likely to remain symptomatic and unlikely to improve with the time. The etiologies for these this could be infant feeding formula, car restraints, hiatus hernia, obesity, supine position immediately after the food, and the genetic predisposition. The clinical manifestations could be heartburn, which is the cardinal symptom of this, the chest pain or the heartburn mimicking the chest pain, dysphagia and hematemesis, that is the blood which is seen in the vomits, airway problems such as laryngitis, cough, and asthma. Frequent regurgitation may lead to mucosal injury that can be manifested in the form of esophagitis and esophageal ulceration. In the older children, they may also complain of epigastric retrosternal pain or dysphagia or the postprandial fullness. The oral manifestations could be dental erosion because of the constant increase in the pH in the oral cavity and vomiting. The dentine could also be exposed because of the severe dental erosion. Irreversible pulpitis could be seen in multiple tooth and dental sensitivity. These are the clinical pictures of the patient with GERD. As here we can see, there is erosion in the teeth present. The dentine and the pulp is also exposed in these cases. Now coming to the dental management, keep the position of the chair in the upright or semi-reclined position so that the patient is comfortable and they do not have a gag reflex or the sensation of vomiting. Avoid the long appointments, avoid heavy meals prior to the treatment, provide the topical fluoride therapy as these patients are more exposed to the acidic environment. Therefore, the topical fluoride therapy may help in the remineralization of the tooth. Restore the tooth structure and protection by the crowns. Patients on the cimetidine or the H2 antagonist may have toxic reaction to the local anesthetic injection. Therefore, the drug history should be recorded in these patients. The soft tissue changes of the esophageal structure may make the intubation difficult for the patients undergoing general anesthesia. Now coming to the inflammatory bowel disease, that is IBD. It is a chronic disease of inflammatory origin affecting the gastrointestinal tract. There are two important clinical entities of this, which includes the Crohn's disease and the ulcerative colitis. And this disease is seen most prevalent in the North America and the Western Europe. The rate of incidence is 0.2 to 8.5 per 1000 births for Crohn's disease, while 0.5 to 4.3 per 1000 live births for ulcerative colitis. And the proportion of the IBD increases with the age, with the maximum age group in the 12 to 18 years. The early onset of the IBD, that is occurring before the 5 years, is unique and difficult to classify. There is no sex predilection seen with IBD. The pathogenesis, various factors like environmental factors like stress, diet, or smoking could lead to IBD, or microbial flora. The metabolites from the microbial flora may induce the inflammatory bowel disease, or genetic susceptibility or impaired immunity. The dietary antigens of the microbial invasion stimulates the antigen which attach themselves to the intestinal mucosa, and there is activation of the innate immunity, and therefore there is inflammation in the bowel. If the host is normal, then there is activation of the lymphocytes and the disease is controlled. But if the host is susceptible to IBD, then there is failure of the activation of the lymphocytes, and therefore it leads to tissue injury, and which is later manifested as inflammatory bowel disease. Now, classification, it could be according to the position, the places which are affected by this. It could be in this only in this affecting the small intestine, or it could be affecting both the small intestine as well as the large intestine, or it could be affecting only the large intestine. It could be ileocolic Crohn's disease, large intestine, which is seen in the 50% of cases, or it could be Crohn's ileitis. The clinical features of the Crohn's disease, it includes inflammation in the eyes, in the skin, the ulcers and the sores are seen, and fever, weight loss, decreased appetite could be seen, pain in the joints and swellings could be seen. In the intestine, the changes like diarrhea, abdominal pain, cramping, or the ulcerations in the digestive tract could be seen. Liver and bile duct are inflamed, and rectal bleeding could also be noticed by these patients. This is endoscopic images of the bowel, and here we could clearly see the inflammation or the erythema in the bowel of the patients affected with IBD. The symptoms of ulcerative colitis, it may include fatigue, fever, mouth ulcers, irritated or the red eyes, weight loss, recurring diarrhea, needing to empty the bowels frequently, rectal bleeding, rectal mucus. The area of the painful areas of painful in the joint could be red and swollen. Skins also could be seen. Abdominal cramps could be noted. Painful and swollen joints and loss of appetite could be seen. Now the difference between the Crohn's and the Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. For Crohn's disease, it is more seen in the males as compared to females, whereas ulcerative colitis doesn't have a sex predilection. Signs and symptoms in Crohn's disease: abdominal pain, diarrhea, weight loss, anorexia, and growth failure are seen. Whereas in ulcerative colitis, bloody diarrhea and abdominal pain are noticed. Location: Crohn's disease is located from mouth to anus, involving all the layers of the gut. And whereas the ulcerative colitis only involves the mucosa in the colon. In the endoscopic findings also, segmental distribution could be seen in the Crohn's disease, whereas ulcerative colitis have a general pattern which is uniform. In the histological findings, non-caesating granulomas could be seen in Crohn's disease, whereas abscess and the crepitus is seen as ulcerative colitis. Now coming to the oral manifestations, diffuse labial, gingival or mucosal swellings are seen in IBD. Cobblestoning of the buccal mucosa and the gingiva could be seen. Abscess ulcers are noticed. Mucosal tags, angular cheilitis and orofacial granulomatosis is seen. Here we can see there is swelling on the labial mucosa and the cobblestone appearance. This is the known as the cobblestone appearance, which we could see in the buccal mucosa here. That is the placement of the it is known as cobblestone because they are roughly assembled. The other findings could be increased dental caries, decreased saliva production. The methotrexate, which is used as a drug for the treatment of IBD, could cause the mouth sores. The TNF drugs which are used could cause the sore throat and nasal congestion. The salivary gland pathologies could be seen, dental erosion and halitosis could be noted. The dental management. Before treatment, it is important to rule the adrenal gland suppression as they are on the long-term corticosteroid therapies. The oral agents may respond to the steroid therapy but should be refrained from using it on the regular basis as it may cause the mucosal atrophy. The patient should be evaluated for the routine preventive dental care to prevent the soft and hard tissue destructions. Avoid the salicylates and the NSAIDs as they may result in flare-ups. Therefore, we should use acetaminophen alternative. In the undiagnosed patients, persistent oral manifestations of the recurrent apthe, linear ulcer and the persistent swelling may be seen, and therefore we should rule out the possibility of underlying GI disorders. The occurrence and recognition of the pyostomatitis vegetans, it is an essential marker for ulcerative colitis, which could be seen in the figure here. In this, the pustules of the are seen on the mucosa, and the prevention and avoidance of the oral infections can be taken care by making the frequent dental visits, and elective oral care should be planned in these patients. And the relationship between the immune system and the oral manifestations of the inflammatory bowel disease, a review by Vasovic et al. They have seen the changes in the oral cavity often precedes the intestinal symptoms, and the inflammatory bowel disease leads to significant deterioration of the oral health, which indicates that cooperation between the dentist and the gastroenterologist is necessary when considering the patient's welfare. The patients with IBD have an altered immune response, but the microorganisms of the oral cavity may be a responsible factors for this modification. Now, another article, does the poor oral health protect against the inflammatory bowel disease, by Kelsen et al. And the authors have hypothesized that excessive oral hygiene may result in dysbiosis and contribute to the pathogenesis of inflammatory bowel disease. And further, they speculated that poor oral health may decrease the risk of IBD through the induction of immune tolerance. But furthermore, studies are required for confirmation of this hypothesis. Thus, I would like to conclude that as we have discussed the various medically compromised patients management, including the cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, hematological diseases, renal diseases, liver diseases, and the HIV and GI diseases, we being the dentist should know about the signs and symptoms and the essential dental management of all these diseases, as the patient may come with the history of the disease, or the oral symptoms may precede the clinical features, and we are the first ones to diagnose, as there is a saying that eyes only see things which the mind knows. Therefore, we should know the clinical features, signs, symptoms, and management of these diseases to treat the patient. These are my references. Thank you.